So next up, we have Seth Hunter. He is a user experience research scientist at Intel Labs.
I did at the MIT Media Lab. The future of shared experiences at a distance, just a bit of a provocation about that. And then I'd like to share some tools that I've been building to help support that. So the provocation is, how can we empower future generations to build and share worlds with us even when we're apart? Building the imagination of the child and also the relationship between the child and the parents, or the relationships between each other as creative individuals. In order to support that, I built a system called WAZAM. And all these people are in different locations, but they're blended into the same virtual environment. WAZAM is like Skype plus Connect plus your imagination. You take the Connect camera, you plug it into your PC, you plug the PC into your TV, and WAZAM, you're connected to another person. What you see is what they see, so you're in the same virtual space together. And this is something that came out of experimentation once the Connect camera came out at the Media Lab, where I started to blend people together and I started to experiment a little bit with networking. And this is kind of what it ended up looking like. I can be in the environment and raise my hand, and by the skeleton tracking, I can sort of interact with this menu. The other person who's at a distance, or in a different room in this case, can participate in creating a world with me. This is like a 2.5D world where you have a bunch of floating PNGs that are in sort of a 3D space, so you can step in front and behind things. But you can also place things appropriately. The interface supports being able to search for items on the internet, remove the background with OpenCV, and then place them dynamically into a kind of Photoshop-y world together. And this is perfect for parents and children creating worlds together with my system. And so that's what we studied. We focused primarily on divorced families who are separated and trying to understand what kinds of worlds they would build together at a distance. Do we have sound, Greg? Just want to make sure. Okay. So I want to give you about a 1 or 2 minute look at what the families created together, and these are studies we did, because I think it's a powerful example of what it's like to be together when you're separated at a distance in a virtual space.
Here, Ethan, hitch your ride in the car.
I'm going to hitch a ride on your leg.
Hey, Neil, what was that noise? I don't know. I have the table. I actually have the table.
Are you supposed to be on the table?
No.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, we just sang.
I think we'll hold him his eye.
So transformation was a big part of it, making yourself small. Moving the other person around in the space. Designing your own backgrounds. All these backgrounds were designed mostly by the children. And then the parent helped support the design.
No, wait, I'm going to try to go up those stairs. Oh, there we go.
Oh, it actually looks like we're actually in our living room.
Try getting into the X1 fire.
So the parent can help the child play in an environment that they created in the physical world, but then it becomes part of the digital world. So that probably gives you a sense that, I mean, they're cute kids, but they're actually playing together in a virtual space. And you're not doing this when you're Skyping. We compared Skype to other conditions. But more importantly than sharing you the research that we did, I want to explain why I built it, and looking forward, why I think we should have more types of experiences like this with each other. More and more of us are geographically separated. 40% of children come from divorced families. And people in general, I think, like to be creative at a distance. We see this with multiplayer games. Right now, when we're Skyping with real-time video, it's all in separate windows. So all of these environments are in separate spaces. Especially kids between the age of 3 and 7 have a really hard time paying attention, and turn-taking is really the only way you can communicate. You can't do things at the same time and have shared experiences. With the Connect and the Wii, we see families getting on their feet and interacting together with virtual content. And this is really powerful, but we don't have authentic representations of ourselves, and we can't incorporate the real world. And I think what people really want is to be together when they're apart. And so this is sort of the core message that I'm trying to get at. There are a few things that I learned from the research that I think are useful if you're working in this space. You can support shared activities by using suggestive scenes and adding more interactivity. We didn't add enough. The three major things people did were active things like playing, running around, social engagement where they were talking and playing, and then actually pretending and imagining things together. Interacting in digital scenes that we created was kind of like playing in a playground. If they created it, it was like they were designing their own playground. And I thought that was really powerful to watch the kinds of spaces that they made. Typically, kids would make either fantasy spaces, or the parents would suggest something familiar if they were divorced, like being in the kitchen or the bedroom together. But it allows children to enact their own ideas, and the families could adapt the environments to their needs. So I think a new shared medium is emerging, and it's really the result of emerging depth cameras, but also the display technologies. And if you look back 100 years, people were predicting Skype. This is a postcard from a French artist in 1910. And I'd like to do the same thing looking forward. What's it going to be like, 20 or 30 years from now for us to interact together at a distance? I think there's this sort of exponential acceleration. And it's been forecasted by artists and hackers for the last 30 years, starting with Myron Kruger. And looking at interactive art in the gallery space, which I kind of came from, I see a lot of things in the gallery that I'd like to see in people's living room. And you may have experienced some of these installations yourself. It's just powerful to kind of overlap a representation of yourself with another person. It really does blend the physical and the digital world, and I think looking at what people did with the Kinect camera when it came out was fairly powerful, and I think there's a reason why everyone was very intrigued by this. We can empower children to interact with digital things the way they do in the physical world. And I think a lot of artists who are using open frameworks, which is a creative framework that I use, have been exploring how they can do this. Theo Watson and Chris Oshia here. And if you look at the work that people are creating with open frameworks, you'll see a lot of examples of this. And so I think that it's going to be a product of the internet, and there's a project called Clouds.
In general, everyone in this community is used to sharing in some way.
How does this work when humans are connecting from across the planet and creating something larger? It's almost like people across the planet are dreaming together.
So I'm very curious about people's conversations. I'm interested in what people are thinking.
We are all getting smarter through each other in ways that we could never have imagined before.
So this is a film coming out by James George and several others at Sundance that uses a depth camera strapped to an SLR camera to film people using both depth and RGB images, which is a very interesting opportunity for cinematographic representations, but I think it's also an interesting opportunity for us to connect together when we're at a distance. And you've seen an emergence of 3D cameras across the spectrum from industry to open source. And I think artists, hackers, and designers are beginning to appropriate these in very interesting ways, and that we should try to support their development. So in order to do that, I've been working on a series of open source libraries that I'd like to conclude with by sharing them with you. Because I think that looking ahead 2 to 5 years, it's going to be the role of designers and artists and technologists such as yourselves to invent the way that we connect with each other and to make augmented reality technologies serve our human purposes. So in order to do this, I've tried to leverage the most creative people I can find through open frameworks and some of the most technical people through this project called Gstreamer, which you may be familiar with. It's a multimedia framework that works in Linux. Gstreamer handles a lot of the streaming issues that you may have encountered when you're trying to make things like Skype that work at a distance. And the libraries that we're working on try to solve a lot of the issues that I was unable to solve in my doctorate work, such as NAT traversal, compression, frame synchronization, and working with lossy networks. So the hundreds of people that worked on Skype created a nice product. This is an open source implementation. The idea is that if I want to build something and share it with a friend, I should be able to send the depth representation, the skeleton data, the RGB, and the audio at a distance, and I should have control over those bytes. We should be able to send whatever we want to each other peer-to-peer and have access to those compression techniques and the algorithms, and just use the internet to create that initial handshake and to share public assets. So I'm trying to set up an open source project that will enable maybe 20 or 30 people at first to begin to build more experiences like what I built and shared with you today. And I want to give you a preview of of it working, because we have it working on all 3 platforms right now. We just need to make better documentation. So this is Arturo. He's the primary developer of Open Frameworks, and myself. And we're interacting. He's in Berlin, and I'm in my office here in Santa Clara. And we're interacting together with our Kinect cameras at the same time, so we can switch back and forth to different views. But we can also share the same virtual space. So this is a slightly different representation where we're being rendered in a 3D space. Here, we're across from each other, and I can sort of translate the view. It might be a bit hard to see here. But we can also experiment with being in the same 3D space at the same time, so aligning the views together. So this is just like in the last 2 to 3 weeks, and it's kind of surreal because I've never met Arturo, but yet we're coding together on this project, and he's the primary architect. He's a genius. But I've managed to coordinate the resources to help him make this something more professional. So if you're interested in building imagination and building relationships at the same time, please contact me. I would really like to have Gstreamer be a tool that people use in their research. And we're trying to make it a completely open thing, not only so I can build experiences, but so I can see what kinds of aesthetics and interesting environments other people would like to build as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. We have time for a couple questions if anybody has them.
Hi. I'm curious about your experience with eye contact in these environments, just because it's kind of difficult to get that happening, and what are your thoughts on that?
It feels like you're looking in the mirror. So it's like you're standing in front of the mirror, and then somebody appears in the mirror as well. And so the focus is you sort of see yourself as well as the other person in the environment. And you're aware of them, and you can look directly at them, but it doesn't feel like you're making eye contact in a sort of across the table interaction. And so in a lot of discussions we had with companies who were interested in, well, where is this kind of side-by-side interaction going to be interesting? I think it's interesting for things like exercising together or playing music together or doing a language lesson. Most of our funding right now comes from a research institution in Japan that's interested in enacting language learning scenarios. So I can pretend I'm in the grocery store and someone in Japan can sort of, actually teach me Japanese while we're in the grocery store together. So I think there's a very niche area, maybe 10 or 15% of things where side-by-side interaction makes a lot of sense.
Can you kind of envision a change in the technology where it could be more possible to have things like eye contact happening, or for example,
definitely.
Maybe in virtuality, if there's a shared head tracker, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean the gaze problem is something that people have been studying for a long time. One of the reasons I joined Intel is because they're working on different types of image configurations to solve some of these issues. And so I think, having the frameworks there, not only for passing the network stuff, but for, working with new types of 3D cameras is going to enable people to solve these problems. And we just have to work together to combine the hardware and the software in ways that serve, our human purposes. So, thank you.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Seth.